I welcome you all to the module 11 of this course. This is the third lecture of module 11 and overall it is lecture number 26. So, the module 11 is about developing positive personality traits, and in today's lecture more specifically we will be talking about empathy as a personality trait. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, last lecture, that is lecture number 25, which is also part of the same module. We talked about, in terms of positive personality trait, resilient personality trait. We discussed what is the meaning of resilient personality trait, what are its characteristics, what are the different traits associated with the resilient personality. We discussed both internal trait as well as interpersonal traits, and at the end we discussed that in terms of clinical applications or implications, there is a lot of application of this resilient personality trait, and we discussed some of these implications in the clinical settings. So, this was about last lecture. So, in today's lecture we will be more specifically focus on empathy as a trait, which is a positive personality trait. So, we will be talking about the concept of empathy, sympathy and compassion. We will be talking about the different aspects of empathy. We will be talking about some of the neurological system that are associated with the empathy, and we will discuss some of the variables which are associated with the empathy, and we will also at the end discuss how can we cultivate empathy more in our life. So, let us start today's lecture. So, let us start with the concept of empathy. So, what is the meaning of empathy? Now, empathy is basically it's derived from a Greek word empathia, which basically means feeling into. So, when we faced with emotions of another individual, whenever we kind of observe that someone else is expressing certain kind of emotions, individuals generally most of the normal individuals, we frequently experience a natural inclination to adopt and share that someone's emotional state. If we are connected with that individuals, whatever emotion that person is expressing, generally we feel a sense of kind of reciprocating or kind of adopt or share the same emotions with that person. So, sense of empathy basically comes from that sense or natural inclination towards getting connected with the others emotions. So, in this way one person's sorrow can transform into your own sorrow, someone else's sorrow can become your sorrow when we kind of connect with the emotions of another person, and one's happiness can becomes my own happiness as well. So, this kind of response where an observer mirrors the emotional experience of another person is called as empathy. When we mirror someone else's emotions, whatever emotion someone else is expressing, when you mirror that or kind of similar emotion you also experience because of the expression of that person, that is called the sense of empathy. So, empathy is generally described as a capacity of an individual to imagine themselves in someone else's situations or putting themselves in someone else's shoes. So, that is the term, that is generally phrase that is used, putting yourself in the shoes of another person. That means, you put yourself in the position of another person and just kind of look world through that person's perspective. So, this is one important aspect of empathy, then only you will be able to understand what kind of emotions a person is experiencing. So, it involves the skills of understanding and acknowledging their emotions and effectively expressing these feelings to others. So, understanding someone else's emotion and then expressing it appropriately. So, empathy involves being mindful of the feelings, needs and concerns of other. Obviously, people who are more empathetic, they are more mindful and sensitive to the feelings, needs and concerns of other individual, then only they are more able to experience the sense of empathy. So, it encompasses a range of competencies including understanding others, facilitating their development, embracing diversity, being politically aware. So many other aspects can contribute to the development of empathy, some of which we will be talking about in this lecture. So, it mostly comes from the understanding of another's perspective. So, in humans, empathy can emerge even in the absence of another person, sometimes through imagination or thinking about someone else, even though someone else may not be physically present, just through thinking and imagining about someone else we can experience empathy. The significance of empathy lies partly in the ability to establish effective and efficient connection with others. The more we feel connected to another individual, more we are likely to experience empathy. So, connected in a positive sense. So, empathy is basically kind of psychological super glue. It connects people connects people. So, it's like a glue that connects people, help us to connect people, that connects people and undergirds cooperation and kindness. Whatever cooperation we see among people, whatever kindness we see among people, one of the foundation of this kindness and cooperation is the sense of empathy. Otherwise, no one will cooperate, no one will show kindness. These emotions, which are very important in the social world, are basically comes from the sense of empathy. So, empathy, recognized as a key characteristics of emotional intelligence, assumes significant role in all theories of emotional intelligence. Empathy is one of the very important component of emotional intelligence, which is a concept that talks about that the emotional intelligence as a concept, which is very important in, has been found to be very important in the research in the success of personal and professional life, and empathy is one such component. Now, to understand the implications of empathy, we can imagine certain situations. So, these are some of the situations that I just wrote here, which simply reflects the importance of empathy in the social world. So, if you consider a lot of, let us say, in a world there, in a social world, if you imagine that there is no empathy among human beings, what will happen? Some of the situations we can just imagine here. Imagine a child crying due to hunger and desperately needing someone's response. It could be mother's response, or let us say mother's response, but no one is helping that child or feeding that child. What kind of consequence or outcome we can expect in this situation? Picture yourself in extreme pain in a hospital, longing for the attention of a nurse or doctor, but no one is attending to you. Just imagine being unable to walk due to old age, and no one is helping you in terms of walking or crossing the road and so on. Visualize you are lying on the road because of an accident and no one is helping you. Experience, let us say you are experiencing emotional turmoil or depression, whatever it is, and you want to share that feelings with someone, but no one is willing to listen to you. Imagine being consumed by depression after a major career disappointment, lacking anyone to console or provide encouragement. So, these are some of the situations that we are seeing. Let us say in all this situation, no one is showing concern and supporting you, it is going to have a very devastating consequences. So, all this, if no one is coming to you in all this situation, one of the reason is lack of empathy. But so kind of support and sense of support in all this situation is so important. One of the main reason behind is that people are still helping or maybe helping in all this situation, it is because of the empathy. If people lacks empathy completely in all this situation, no one will come forward and help you. So, this simply shows how important the sense of empathy is in the social world, where we kind of dependent on each other in so many aspects of our life. So, empathy plays very vital role in terms of connecting each of us with others and helping each other in various challenging situation or adverse situations in our life. So, this all reflects the importance of empathy in our social world. So, this situation emphasizes the profound repercussion of a world lack of empathy. If there is a lack of empathy, what is going to happen, we can just imagine. It simply highlights the immense value of empathy in addressing human needs, comfort, connection, support. We cannot think of a world without empathy. So, before we talk about some of the other aspects of empathy, there are three terms which are very many times people use them synonymously, but they are not synonymous. So, they are very similar terms, but with different connotations. One is empathy, another is sympathy, another is compassion. Many people many times use them very almost like in the same way, but technically there are certain differences. So, these are three terms which are basically distinct concepts that relate to understanding and responding to the emotions and experiences of others. All these three terms are, the context is generally same. In the context of responding to the emotions of another person, all these three concepts are used in terms of describing those situations. So, what are the technical differences between these three terms? So, sympathy is basically it refers to mostly the feeling of pity or sorrow for someone else bad situation or a suffering. So, whenever someone else is suffering in their life or they are undergoing certain hardships in their life, you feel very sense of sorrow, sense of pity for that person. So, that is sympathy. You are just because looking at the situation of another person and you are feeling bad about that person. So, that is sense of sympathy. So, it involves recognizing and acknowledging another person's emotions without necessarily sharing the same experience or emotion. You simply acknowledge that the situation of another person's, and without necessarily really putting yourself into their positions and now deeply connecting with them, which is the concept of empathy. So, in a sense, sympathy is little bit more superficial as compared to empathy. Empathy has a deep connection, which may not be in this case of sympathy. Here you only feel bad about looking at someone's situation, you may not be deeply connected with the situation of that person, and you just feel sorry and you feel a sense of pity and so on. So, sympathy often involves expressing care. You may express care, concern and support for someone, but it may not involve the same level of emotional connection or understanding as empathy. So, in comparison to empathy, sympathy is a little bit more superficial in terms of connection or in terms of intensity of emotion that person experiences in response to another's emotions. So, that sympathy you just show concern by looking at the situation of another person, or you feel sense of pity and so on. Empathy, as we have already discussed, is more like putting yourself in the position of that person's or kind of sharing the feelings of another person. It involves looking the world through their perspective. So, there is a deeper identification with the situation of another person. So, empathy requires emotional connection and actively seeking to understand and validate someone else's feeling. It is focused on the emotions and perspective of another person. So, it is more of a deeper connection in terms of emotions, in terms of connection as compared to sympathy. So, empathy involves a deeper emotional connection with others, as it requires genuine experiencing and connecting with emotions of another person. Sympathy is still showing concern, may not involve the same level of emotional engagement with another person. So, that is the difference. In terms of expression, that may be very similar, but in terms of actual emotional connection, empathy is much deeper. The third one is compassion. It is more broader concept, which may include both sympathy and empathy. So, compassion is a broader concept under which empathy and sympathy both can come under this. So, it encompasses empathy, sympathy, and also it goes beyond that. How it goes beyond that is that compassion involves not only understanding and acknowledging someone's emotions, but also feeling a genuine desire to alleviate their suffering or help them in some way. So, their sense of action is also important in compassion. You not only feel sense of connection, sympathy and empathy, you also try to remove the suffering of that person in terms of taking certain actions. So, compassion is more broader in that sense. So, it combines empathy and sympathy with a sense of action and a genuine wish to provide comfort, support and assistance to another person's need. So, in terms of broadness, compassion is the most broader term as compared to sympathy and empathy. So, these three terms sometimes used in the day to day language very synonymously, but technically they have differences in terms of to what extent the person gets engaged with that another person emotionally. So, this just to summarize, empathy is about understanding and sharing others' emotion. Sympathy involves feeling sorrow for someone's end situation. Compassion encompasses both sympathy and empathy, while also it emphasizes intention to remove the suffering and offer help. So, this is how it is shown in terms of intensity of emotion. At the lowest level, it is sense of pity, then it comes to sympathy, then comes empathy, then at the end it comes compassion. So, in terms of intensity of emotion, it is moving from lower to higher, from pity or sympathy to compassion. So, these are the terms which connotes different levels of emotional connection with another person. So, when we talk about empathy, again just like resilience that we discussed in the last lecture, it can be both as a trait as well as a state. So, we will just talk little bit about that. So, empathy is basically it can be shaped by both individual trait capacity. Some people by nature they have more empathy. So, it is like their personality trait. Most of the situation, in any situation where there is a sense of emotional expression of another person, they will feel sense of empathy. So, in general their ability is they frequently experience in most of the situations. So, it is like their inherent identity, sense of characteristics that they define all the time, that exudes all the time from them. So, trait is more like their personal characteristics which they show in most of the situations. Sometimes in terms of state empathy, it means sometimes you may not have a very high trait of empathy, but sometimes because of a situation somebody say may show certain empathy in certain situation. So, that is dependent on the state or that environmental situation. So, that is how it is defined in terms of how trait are different from the state empathy. So, empathy is generally shaped between individual state capacity and the situational influences. Some people may not be very highly empathetic, but in certain situations they become highly empathetic because of the situation. So, that is called as a state empathy. So, trait empathy refers to a stable ability that demonstrate empathy which is strongly linked to interpersonal trait. For example, a person who consistently feel compassion or sense of empathy for others in distress. So, every time that person will see somebody is in distress, he will also feel sense of very strong connection and sense of distress in him or her, himself or herself. So, trait becomes a very stable characteristics which remains with that person in all situations, in most of the situations. On the contrast, state empathy is temporary emotional response triggered by specific situations. For example, feeling sudden empathy when witnessing someone in pain. Now, someone without having a trait very strong empathy, some situation people may become highly empathetic. So, that is also possible. So, that is the difference between trait and state empathy. So, we are mostly looking at it also as a personality trait, and having a trait of empathy, how it is beneficial, what are its implications, that is what we are looking at it. So, in this particular course of personality, we are talking empathy from the perspective of trait, but it can be also in the state perspective where it can be a product of situation also. Now, researchers have tried to find connection between the big 5 factors or trait factors that we have already discussed, and how which factors among the big 5 are connected to empathy. So, some of the research finding I will be just talking here. So, big 5 model, as we said, consists of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness and neuroticism. These are the big 5 traits model which has the highest research support, at least at present, which shows these are the 5 traits by which we can discuss almost all the individual variations and the characteristics of human beings, and how these 5 traits are connected to the sense of empathy. So, let us see some of the research finding. So, one of the trait which has been consistently linked with empathy is agreeableness. Now, this trait is most strongly correlated with empathy, especially emotional empathy, feeling of what others feel. So, this sense of empathy is very much kind of imbibed in the trait of agreeableness. So, the people with high agreeableness are generally they have found to be they also show higher empathy. So, individual high in agreeableness tend to be compassionate, cooperative and motivated to maintain harmonious relationships. So, these are the characteristics of agreeableness. So, people with higher agreeableness trait, they are more compassionate, they are more cooperative, they are also have better relationship, less conflict, more harmonious relationships, and this natural tendency towards kindness and understanding makes people more empathetic. So, that is the reason why agreeableness is strongly connected to the sense of empathy. So, among big 5, most of the research shows agreeableness is a very strong predictor of empathy. Another trait among these big 5 is openness to experience. Some research also shows that people high in this trait, openness, are also generally they show characteristics of imaginative, curious and open to new experiences, which fosters generally cognitive aspect of empathy, which will be discussed little bit later, which basically means mentally how you are able to understand others perspective. So, that is called cognitive part of the empathy, understanding someone else's perspective. So, openness to experience is generally strongly connected to the cognitive aspect of empathy. So, the more you understand the perspective of another person, more you are likely to feel connection with that person or kind of express emotions accordingly. So, they are better at seeing things from multiple point of view, which enhances their ability to empathize intellectually even in the situation outside their personal experiences. So, because of this ability of openness to experience, the people are more likely to understand the perspective of others and feel empathy. So, openness to experience has also been found to be connected to the sense of empathy. So, agreeableness, openness. Then another trait among these 5 is conscientiousness. This is a trait associated with being characterized by behaving responsible way, organized way and dependable way. So, people with high conscientiousness are very organized people, very responsible people, very dependable. You can depend on them. If you give them some task, they will do it, and they are very organized and very structured life. So, this is not very strongly connected like agreeableness with empathy, but conscientious people, because of their certain characteristics, often show empathetic behavior in structured and caring roles. If they in a structured situation, they have to do certain services related to caring other people, they are very good at it. So, structured or caring roles such as helping others in an organized deliberate manner, like caregiving professions like nursing and those kind of thing, while it is a very structured, they had to provide support according to the rules and regulations. Conscientious people have shown to be show very high empathy in those situations. Role of other two traits in the big 5 factors, neuroticism and extroversions, their relationship with the empathy is not very clear. Some shows there are certain relationship, other research they do not show such strong connection. So, their relationship with the empathy is not very clear in the research findings. So, among the big 5 factors, 3 traits have been found to be very strong predictor of empathy, and most important trait among them is agreeableness. Others are openness to experience and conscientiousness. Now, when we talk about empathy as a trait or as a quality, so it has 3 important aspects, 3 major components, all 3 contribute to the sense of empathy. One is cognitive aspects, which we kind of discussed a little bit in the earlier slide. Then there is an emotional empathy, and then there is an empathic concern. So, let us see what are these 3 aspects of empathy. So, cognitive empathy is more of mentally understanding others' perspective, is also known as perspective taking empathy, refers to ability to understand and intellectually grasp the thoughts, beliefs and emotions of other. Intellectually, thought processes to understand the perspective of another person, how other persons are looking at the world, what are their thought processes. So, to what extent you are able to understand that others' perspective. So, that is the cognitive part of empathy. Without that, you cannot feel also, because feelings will come from your understanding only. So, this is the cognitive aspect is very important. It gives you a sense of understanding, and from that understanding you also feel accordingly. So, it involves putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing the world from their perspective. So, this cognitive empathy relies on mental processes such as perspective shifting, theory of mind, imagining how someone else might think and so on. So, it is mostly of a mental ability or ability of thought processes to understand others' perspective. So, this is called cognitive empathy. The emotional empathy, which is mostly we understand when as a layman perspective, we understand empathy mostly from the perspective of emotional empathy or emotional part of it. So, it basically involves sharing and experiencing the emotions of others. So, what kind of emotions others are experiencing, you also experience the same emotions. So, that is the emotional part of empathy. It is the capacity to feel what someone is feeling. So, your ability to feel others feeling. So, that is the emotional empathy. Ability to understand is the cognitive part, ability to feel others feeling is emotional empathy. Emotional empathy enables individuals to resonate with and respond emotionally to experience and emotional states of others. So, it involves visceral or automatic emotional reaction that mirrors the emotions of other persons. So, people with high empathy, they automatically mirrors the emotions of others. So, they are more easily they could connect with others, automatically there is a natural response within them. So, that makes them naturally more higher in the traits of empathy. So, that is called emotional aspects of empathy. The last one is empathic concern, which is more like compassion that we discussed earlier. Is the compassion part of it, where empathic compassion, which goes beyond understanding and sharing emotions. It involves a genuine and compassionate concern for well-being of others. As a genuine concern, and you try to remove their suffering and try to do whatever best possible. So, that sense of concern you show not just in terms of emotion and understanding, but in terms of action also you show that. So, empathic concern motivates individuals to take action and help removing their suffering or difficulties faced by another individuals. So, it includes a sense of warmth, kindness, desire to support, and so basically this is the compassion aspect that we discussed in the earlier slide. So, that is called the empathic concern. So, these are basically 3 important aspects of empathy. One is the cognitive part, where it is mostly your ability to understand the perspective of another person. Emotional empathy is more of feeling the feelings of another persons, and empathic concern is more of action oriented response, which goes beyond just feeling and understanding. So, these are the three parts, and all the three parts are kind of connected to each other, and all the three parts contribute to the sense of empathy. So, these are three important components. So, the different aspects of empathy collectively contribute to our ability to connect with another individuals emotionally or compassionately with another person. Now, if you look at the biological part of empathy, why some people have high empathy and why some people have lower empathy, one of the reasons that have been found in the neurological system is called mirror neuron system or mirror neurons. This was first described by Razalati and his colleagues in 1990s. They were doing some research with the monkeys, and they discovered something called as a mirror neurons. These are the neurons in our brain which promotes lot of this understanding others perspective, including empathy. So, this mirror neuron is a type of neuron or nerve cell that exhibits activity both when an animal or humans performs a specific action and when it observes another animal or human performing the same action. This neuron mirror the observed action, hence their name. So, basically what happens, because of these mirror neurons, we are able to, by looking at another, we are able to feel or experience the same thing as if we are doing it ourselves. So, it is like this neuron will get activated. So, if I use my hand to lift an object, so certain neurons will fire in my brain, but if I also look at someone else also lifting that object, the same set of neurons will get fired. So, as if you are lifting it when you observe it. So, it is because of this mirror neuron that we are able to in terms of biological response almost same as if we are doing. When you look at someone else doing something, your neurons behave as if you are also doing it. So, that is called the mirror neurons. Because of this, we are able to mirror someone else's actions or emotions. So, this mirror neurons has been proposed as the biological basis or mechanisms for a lot of the social behavior, including empathy and other social cognitive aspects. So, because of this mirror neurons, we are able to empathize with another person. Without that, we will not be able to feel empathy for another person. So, this term mirror neurons often refers to a broader concept of network of brain regions. So, mirror neuron does not mean just one neuron in the brain. So, it is a network of certain regions in the brain that connects with each other and fires and sends signals from one part to another part, and that helps to imitate someone else's action as if it is happening within you. So, this mirror system, neuron system in humans is believed to involve a distributed network of interconnected brain regions. Certain brain regions like premotor cortex and the inferior parietal lobule, rather than some isolated separate neurons. So, it includes different regions of the brain. So, many researchers contributed to the understanding of how mirror neurons contribute to the sense of empathy. A lot of people like this Marco, Lecobani, Gellis and Keezers and so on. So, these are the people who did lot of research in this direction. So, what happens? The activation of mirror neurons during observation could potentially lead to a vicarious experience of the observed emotion. So, you see someone else is expressing certain emotions, because of the mirror neuron, the neuron fires, mirror neuron fires, and you are able to, the same emotional regions in the brain gets activated. So, you almost experience the same emotion as the another person. For example, when you witness someone expressing happiness or sadness, the mirror neuron system may activate similar neural circuits associated with your own experience of happiness and sadness. So, mirror neurons will activate sadness or happiness experiences in the brain. So, you will experience that just by looking at another person. So, allowing us to empathize with another person. So, we also feel the same emotion of another person. However, it is important to note that mirror neurons are just one component of a larger network involved in empathy. So, empathy is not just about mirror neurons, it could be one aspect to it. So, there can be many other things involved in the empathy. So, empathy has multifaceted construct, it involves cognitive processes, perspective taking, lot of mental aspects also involved in it, not just physiological aspect, but because of certain maybe this mirror neurons gives a biological support to it. So, overall mirror neurons are a very promising area of research and still it's an ongoing area of research which has contributed to our understanding of empathy in terms of biological aspects or neurological aspects. So, but these are like one piece of larger puzzles of understanding empathy. Obviously, the more clarity will come in the future once more researches are done in this area. So, in terms of the positive, because we are treating empathy as a very positive trait, and it is important because in this world without empathy we will not be able to survive, and we will have lot of conflicts. There will not be any peace and cooperation among people. There will not be any sense of connection and friendship among people without empathy. So, it is a very important construct which binds us all together and gives a positive direction in humanity as a whole. So, in that sense we are saying it is a positive trait. So, research shows that empathy can predict lot of other qualities or lot of other behaviors of human being, or people who show higher empathy, they are more likely to show many other characteristics or positive qualities. Some of the research findings are here listed here. So, the indicators or empathy has been found to predict various indicators of prosocial behavior, things like forgiveness, volunteering for helping others, negatively associated with aggression and bullying. So, people with higher empathy will show less aggression and less bullying. They are more likely to forgive, more likely to help others. So, a lot of indicators of prosocial behavior or helping behaviors are connected to sense of empathy. So, these are all research findings. Research also shows people with higher empathy give more charitable donations to the needy people. Empathy also can override non-cooperation, causing people to more be generous and forgiving and less retaliative. So, basically empathy promotes cooperation and more harmonious behavior. Empathy can also help people adopt more positive attitudes and helping behaviors towards stigmatized groups, particularly disabled and homeless individuals and those with AIDS and so on. It is because of the empathy people also get show concern or help people who are very stigmatized. A lot of people in the general population may not help these people. It may include people with a disability, homeless, people with AIDS and so on. So, people with higher empathy are more likely to have positive attitudes towards these people, and from attitude they may show many positive behaviors also towards them. So, we can see here empathy can predict lot of other positive characteristics or behaviors which are connected to the sense of empathy. Now, we also need to understand when we talk about empathy, if we have a very strong sense of empathy, certain type of aspects of empathy could be very draining also, because if you get too much affected by others' emotions, it will also affect you personally. So, what is the right kind of empathy? So, some researchers have tried to look into this phenomena also, because empathy is a good quality, but it can be also draining on the individuals also. So, in what sense, what aspects of empathy, what kind of empathy is better? So, despite lot of potential advantages that we discussed, empathy alone does not guarantee positive social outcomes for some people if it kinds of becomes a draining process for them. So, cultivation of empathy for effective assistance necessitates right kind of strategy. So, some right kind of strategy has to be there, then only people with higher empathy can able to help other people. Otherwise, if it is too draining and they themselves become highly affected, they will not be able to help other people. So, that is something that is very important in terms of applications of it. So, if empathy is not practiced correctly, it can become an emotionally draining skill, because you will get so much affected by other suffering that you yourself will not be able to function properly. So, the excessive identification with someone else's emotion can induce stress, triggering a cardiovascular stress response similar to physiological reaction one would experience in painful or threatening situations. So, you will almost experience the same pain and other thing, which will also kind of make you disabled in terms of helping others people. So, empathy by directing helping behavior primarily towards individuals with one group. Sometimes people become only empathetic for certain group of people, their own group, whatever that the group they belong to, and this may hinder helping other kind of people or people in other groups. So, that can also be a problematic aspects to it. So, therefore, one has to employ the sense of empathy and perspective. What kind of empathy you show, that is also very important. So, let us see what is what kind of empathy is possible here. So, there are, when we talk about perspective taking, which is very important aspect of empathy, how you take perspective of another person. Empathy is very strongly connected to you understand others perspective, how that person is thinking and feeling, then you kind of identify and try to understand the world. So, that perspective taking can be two types, in two ways one can take perspective, that is where the difference in the outcome will come. One is self oriented perspective, another is other oriented perspective. Both can promote empathy, but the outcome can be very different. So, what is the right kind of empathy? The answer lies in these two types of perspective taking, whether you are taking self oriented perspective or you are taking other oriented perspective. So, let us see what are these two perspectives. When we talk about self oriented perspective taking, it basically means lot of these several adverse consequences or draining process because of empathy happens because of self oriented perspective. It is a form of empathy known as self oriented perspective taking, which involves imagining oneself in someone else's situation. Although empathy is mostly defined in this concept, that you put yourself in the same position, then you also suffer like that another person. That will also promote empathy, no doubt. Empathy is also defined like this in most of the definitions, but but when you almost identify with that person and put yourself in the same position of another person, then such empathy can be very draining in a sense, because you will also exactly suffer like the another person. So, engaging, this is called self oriented perspective, you also kind of suffer with that person based on whatever intensity that person is. So, engaging in self oriented perspective taking, where individuals imagine themselves in another person position, can lead to significant personal distress, particularly in the negative emotion situations, which may hinder the display of prosocial behavior or helping behavior because of the fatigue, the compassion fatigue. The person will become too influenced and too fatigued because of their own emotions. Obviously, this is also empathy, but this kind of perspective taking can be very draining process, and it may hinder actually helping behavior in certain situations. Another way of perspective taking is called other oriented perspective. It involves perspective taking where individuals imagine and understand another person point of view. They imagine and understand, try to understand the another person's point of view. They read their emotions, grasp their experiences in a broader sense, rather than they equally just kind of suffering, putting themselves in their position and suffering just like that. So, in other oriented perspective, the person imagines and understands the other point of view, rather than just immersing himself in that emotional situation. So, that is the difference. This will also promote empathy. The first one also is empathy, but the outcome can be different in both the cases. So, this form of empathy that proves most beneficial for both the giver and the receiver is characterized by other oriented response. So, engaging in these other oriented perspectives taking can lead to development of empathic concern. The person will understand the position, will also show concern, will show compassion, and also be able to help another person, because the person will not also just like become highly debilitated because of their own emotions, because of too much of empathy. They will be little bit aloof from that and will be able to help that person. Commonly referred as compassion, which can be perceived as an emotional response stemming from cognitive process. This emotion has potential to stimulate helping behaviors. So, in such cases one is more likely to help, because then they will be able to function better, understand also and as well as function also. When people too much identify with another positions, then they suffer so much that they are not able to help another person. So, this other oriented perspective taking can be more beneficial in terms of helping behavior. In the in terms of self oriented perspective taking, many people obviously they can also help, but in many situations it can become highly draining process and may not be able to help to their best of potential. So, basically in terms of taking help, steps towards empathy, there can be people have reported various steps. One possible way is that you recognize other person's situation, you remove your own judgment and try to understand other person, feel, imagine, experience the mindset and motive and try to understand. You remove your own judgments and try to understand where's other shoes and then respond. So, this is generally the step that many people, some researcher say this is the steps that one should take in terms of showing empathy or behaving for helping other people. So, that could be one way. Recognize first, then remove your own judgment and biases, then only you will be able to understand others perspective. If you are so full of your own ideas, you will not be able to understand others perspective. To understand other perspective, you have to remove your own biases and assumptions, then you kind of try to understand others perspective, where others shoes, and then respond. So, this could be one of the simplest way of responding empathetically. The main important question is, can we cultivate empathies? Can we enhance this ability? When we talk about something as a trait, generally it looks like more of a kind of fixed or rigid characteristics that either people have or they don't have. But in case of things like resilience or things like traits like empathy or trait like resilience, they can also be shaped. Most of the traits also can be shaped or enhanced based on certain training of the mind or certain kind of interventions. So, similarly, empathy also could be also kind of it could be innate for some individuals, which people with strong trait of empathy, it could be very innate for some individuals. So, they are naturally empathetic, you do not have to teach them. Some others may need to acquire it through deliberate learning. Some people can develop it through learning process, particularly focusing on other oriented perspective taking. One can learn this, because this is not a very difficult thing to understand. Just to understand the process of empathy, one can also develop this ability. So, developing this skill can help reduce a lot of this compassion fatigue that we talked about, especially taking other oriented perspective. So, there is a possibility of enhancing empathy by effectively teaching individual how to practice it. So, basically we can have some intervention strategies to develop empathy by understanding different aspects to it. Abramson in 2021 listed certain strategies that one can employ to enhance our ability of empathy, and I will be discussing some of these strategies that he talked about. So, one is according to Abramson is that one important requirement for developing empathy is your desire to grow empathy. If you do not see the value of empathy, then there is no point you can develop it. People who value this concept of empathy, or they understand that it is an important aspect that kind of promote many positive things in one's life and others' life, that desire is the first important step. If you do not have the desire, obviously you cannot develop it. So, for developing any quality in human mind, any psychological aspects, one has to be motivated to develop it. This is the first requirement. You can have the best of other interventions and best of people supporting you, no one can help you until unless you want to grow in that. So, that is the problem with psychological thing. If you, most of the medical or pharmaceutical medical interventions, whether you like it or do not like it, if you take a tablet or a pill, it will work. But in the psychological aspect, it does not work like that. You have to be willing to do that, or there has to be inner motivation to grow in certain direction, then only something can happen. Others cannot directly force it. So, that is the main thing with any kind of psychological qualities if you want to develop. So, one is that is the desire to grow empathy. That mindset is very important, that desire, their motivation has to be there to develop empathy. If it is there, obviously other thing can be much easier and one can develop it very easily. So, people who believe that empathy can be developed are more likely to exert efforts and motivation in empathizing, even in challenging situations where it may not be, naturally they may not be very empathetic, but if they see the value and motivated to enhance it, they can do it. So, that is something very important. One is desire to grow in empathy. Second is exposure to differences is something very important. People who are exposed to different kinds of people, different varieties of background of people, they are more likely to learn empathy or kind of develop empathy, simply because they have more understanding about the background or the perspective of different kinds of people. If you do not understand the perspective or background of someone, some people, then you cannot empathize with them. If you understand their perspective, their background, the stories, then only you can empathize with them. So, that is exposure to differences is something very important. So, for effectively imagining another person's perspective, having a richer context or understanding is very important. So, engaging with diverse forms of media such as reading books, watching movies featuring protagonists from different racial backgrounds, actively participating with someone else's culture can provide a backdrop of adopting someone else's view. So, more we are able to expose and more we have understanding and knowledge about different backgrounds of people of different types, different cultural backgrounds, then more we are likely to understand this perspective and show empathy. So, that understanding is very important. Without that understanding, we cannot show empathy. No? So, empathy comes from that perspective taking or understanding, which will come only when we are exposed to different varieties of people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different religious background, whatever it is. So, by paying closer attention to others, regardless of whether one is actively engaging in perspective taking, individuals are more likely to develop heightened concern and become more invested in their experiences. Another thing is what Abramson suggested is that sometimes reading fictions or novels can also be help in terms of, because a lot of these stories or fictional stories that we generally read in books and stories and movies, they are coming from the real world characters. So, more we read about it, more we see kind of diverse characters from the stories and the movies, character driven stories, then it also gives us an understanding of different kinds of mindsets that can also so we will be able to immerse ourselves in the narratives of different kinds of people. We can enhance the capacity to understand real individuals in the real world simultaneously. So, that is something also the kind of help us to grow in our understanding of others' perspective. Another is harnessing the power of oxytocin as a hormone, so which can also enhance our sense of empathy. Hormone oxytocin, which is there in both males and females, it is a little bit more in females, is known for its social effects. This hormone actually has more social effects. What kind of social effects? It contributes to the facilitation of empathy. It has the ability to induce helping response even among individuals who lack blood relationship or something like that. So, even somebody may feel connection to strangers or something like that. So, many times a lot of empathy could be connected to some biological aspects also, like some hormones like oxytocin, if it is released, that promotes bonding. So, what happens? How this oxytocin releasing behavior, such as sometimes making eye contact with people, gentle physical touch, handshake and those kind of things, it can harness or kind of lead to more release of oxytocin as a hormone, which can kind of promote bonding with other people and enhance empathy and so on. So, some of these biological aspects like certain hormones like oxytocin, when it is released because of certain behavior, it can also promote those kind of empathy and so on. Another way of enhancing empathy is finding common ground among people, because the moment we see others are different from us, then we cannot empathize with them because we feel they are different. If we can find some common ground among people, then we will feel that they are also same as us, and that will enhance the sense of empathy. Okay? So, a lot of these conflicts, problems happens in human world is because we feel others are different, or that person does not belong to my category, then the conflict is bound to happen. The moment we see certain common ground among people, then we are more likely to feel empathy, feel connection, feel cooperation and so on. So, that is something very important, and if we search, we can find common ground with all human beings, because in the first place we are all human beings. As a species we are common, other things are socially constructed. People have created countries, and people have created regions, people have created religions, people have created so many things we have created, but ultimately one of the common ground is humanity. That is a common ground. If we cannot find any common ground, at least the humanity ground level we can find common ground. So, that is finding common ground is something that also enhances our ability to connect and feel cooperation for this is something very important. So, this is an effective method to enhance this by motivation is by manipulating the perception of who belongs to your in group. When a pre-existing social connection is absent, shared identity becomes difficult. So, to cultivate empathy is in your own interactions prioritize identifying similarities rather than fixing or differences. For example, so this is one example that I said how to find common ground. Other small situations one can find, like let us say despite having opposing political ideologies, let us say you have opposing political ideologies with another person. So, the moment you say this person is different in terms of ideologies, so difficult to kind of find empathy, but you can find many other common grounds with that person also. You and your, let us say, neighbor may discover that your children are of the same age and attend the same school, that can be a common ground. So, like this we can find many common grounds with people if we think relationship with a person is important, then rather than focusing on the differences one can focus on the common ground, that will enhance cooperation, sense of empathy, and that base has to be common ground. So, by building upon this similarity one can cultivate greater empathy. So, as individuals we encompass multiple identities, we all have multiple identities. Some identities will be conflicting with other individuals, some will be similar to another individual. So, where you are focusing, that is very important. So, if you focus on the identities that conflict with another person, then conflict will happen. If you focus on identities that is shared with another person, then cooperation and empathy will happen. So, these are some of the things that or ways that we can focus on to enhance our empathy. Small things we can focus on, we can kind of develop certain strategies and practice this, and we can have or kind of increase our sense of empathy. So, these are some of the things about the one of the positive personality trait, that is empathy, and which is very important, and these are some of the aspects of empathy. With this I will stop here. Thank you.